Being a 3D artist is amazing. I love making models, I love making renders and scenes, but if there's one thing that's missing, it is actually holding your own render in your hand. And that's why I got myself a brand new 3D printer and things got out of hand pretty quickly. I'm printing like crazy, and in this video I'll show you why you might want to invest into a 3D printer yourself, but also the challenges I faced and overcame. And in the near future I might even start a side hustle with this printer. This is the Bambu Lab P1P, and people on the internet have been going crazy over this machine, and I totally understand why. This really is a beast. It's quick to set up, it's easy to use, and there's a very low learning curve to get decent prints. I'm quite certain that I'll be using this 3D printer a lot in the future, so let me know in the comments if you're interested in knowing about that. And this is the first time I'm using a 3D printer. All right. This we've got a nice little box over here. Useful tools. It's pretty much impossible. Never use the knife towards yourself, people, like I just did. Tools. Free up. Oh, it actually specifically says not to use scissors. Glad I used the knife. It's only 8 instructions. Always to the left when you need to unscrew something. To the left. This one should go right in here, and it also clicks. Slide it in like this. Pretty sturdy. Now it's time to do some actual printing. So I've made this, but I also made this. I started printing pretty much everything. Flower pots, anime stuff because I like anime, and some friends were quite excited and started buying stuff. So I made this dragon ashtray, I made this Mazda MX-5, and I also made this ship from One Piece. Total, I've made a small but much appreciated amount of money in the first week, and although it isn't much, I thoroughly enjoyed the process, and in the end of this video, I'll show you how much I've actually made by selling 3D printed items to my friends. As things started moving, I also decided to paint my 3D models by hand, something I never thought I would be doing. So I bought some spray cans and started with the painting process. You can't paint on the PLA directly, so first you have to prime it using a primer, and then afterwards you can paint on it and the paint will actually stick. In a moment we're going through some settings in the Bambu Lab slicer that I've found to be the most important, but first improving certain skills. I'm having so much fun with 3D printing that I decided to improve on my sculpting and modeling skills some more. So I sculpted a cat, a dragon, this wise old creature, like what the hell is this? I've also made some Pokeballs for the Christmas tree, a deer outline, and some other Pokemons as well. Then I ran into a problem. I really wanted to know about the mechanics of how to screw one object onto another object. And I'm not an engineer, but after several tries, I finally got it to work, and it felt so gratifying to actually have a system that works, 3D printed and all. And now this thing can be screwed on this thing, and I felt like a total boss for achieving such a simple feat that can be found in everyday items. But still, it's quite an accomplishment. So cool. So there are 3 problems I commonly run into with 3D printing, and these are the solutions for these problems. Number 1, the print comes loose from the bed. So initially the print bed was set to 30 degrees and it did some prints, but suddenly when it started showing problems in other prints, I was baffled, dissatisfied and confused. The reason for this is that the print bed is not hot enough for the plastic to stick to it, and especially with the winter coming and colder temperatures in the office, it didn't work. So how do I fix that? In the Bambu Lab settings, I click on this button and then I can change the print bed temperature to 60 degrees. And now it basically prints everything. Number 2, it always leaves some nasty marks when you have support structures on the model itself, and we actually don't want this. So I found this simple button which says to build supports on the build plate only. Easy as that. And now some useful tips. Model with 3D printing in mind. So this is not something we're used to as Blender users ourselves, because usually we just make a render. We do not have to think about how the structure gets built up. The angle matters. If you go above 45 degrees, the printer will need support structures. This is because the printer can't print plastic in mid-air, obviously. However, we want the least amount of support structures because it saves PLA. It is faster to print and therefore is cheaper and more efficient to produce overall. So always try to model with this thought in mind. Number 2, change your settings to your needs. Oftentimes, it is not necessary to have a 15% grid infill. You can lower it to 10% and it still works. It becomes a little bit more iffy if you set it lower than 10%, but it saves PLA and time. I like to print on 0.15mm layer lines because it gives a better print result most of the time. In order to not have an ugly seam, you can set the seam to random, which I found gives a more pleasant result straight out of the printer. Number 3. The first time I ran out of PLA, I was quite scared whether the model could continue to print after changing the roll. However, this printer detects when you're out of PLA by itself, stops, and then you can continue to print after switching the roll. Everything turned out fine. Number 4. Automatic bed leveling. I've seen online that other printers have to be bed leveled manually, and I'm so happy that I didn't have to go through that because this printer does it all automatically. Number 5. Print speed. The Bambu B1P is very fast compared to other printers. Most prints I do range between 40 minutes and 7 hours. And I've seen some gruesome stories online about how prints can take up to 16 hours and sometimes even days, which I probably will encounter in the future as I start making bigger prints. This Oddish flower pot actually took 4 hours to print. This Mazda MX-5 took 5 hours to print. And this one-piece ship, which was the longest print, took about 7.5 hours. In other words, I haven't experienced 16-hour prints or any crazy stuff like that yet. So yeah, other printers might be 250 euros, but overall this will save you a lot of time in the future. And I'm not sponsored in any way, but I would take it into consideration when you're buying your own 3D printer. I've placed the link of the one I'm using in the description, so you can check that out if you want. Conclusion. Do you remember that when you started out with Blender, you also started looking at the world differently? Suddenly you see modeling structures, you see textures, you see the lighting, and it just changes your entire vision. Well, the same thing will happen with 3D printing. Everything surrounding you is created. Everything has work in it. And everything as a result also has value. You'll start seeing the world again in a different way than you're used to, and it opens a new way of thinking. Not only aesthetically, but also mechanically. I had to think about how a screw works, and it taught me to look at the world in a different manner once again. That's what I find beautiful about Blender, and that's what I find beautiful about 3D printing. In total, I've made 250 euros in my first 2 weeks of 3D printing by selling customized items to my friends and family. It only cost me one roll of PLA, which was 25 euros, and it cost me the paint, which was 30 euros. So in total, without taking the printer into account, I've made 200 euros. As I said, it's not much, but I love how excited people get when they finally get their products in their hands. As I look at the people's faces after I've modeled something in Blender and bring it into reality through the 3D printer, it truly makes me happy as well. And I hope by selling to people in my surroundings that I'll be able to pay off the printer in a couple of months. However, I mainly enjoy the fact that I can now use my hard-earned Blender skills that I've acquired through the years to make people happy and bring a smile to their faces. I hope you enjoyed this video and appreciate the effort I put into it. And if you did, please leave a like or subscribe, do whatever. And if you want to know how I made this render, then I highly recommend watching this video next.